Solution, collide and suspension. Before starting the lecture, click on the subscribe button and get access to our 100 of conceptual lectures for free. Firstly, let me teach you that what is a solution. Well, a solution is a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances. So all homogeneous mixtures are solutions. Let me repeat it. All homogeneous mixtures are solutions. For example, when you dissolve salt in the water, you get a solution. This is also an example of true solution. And this salt solution, water has completely dissolved the particles of salt. Here, let me ask you, can you spot the particles of salt and water in this mixture? Well, you cannot spot the particles of salt and water in this mixture because both the salt and water particles are mixed in such a way that they form a uniform composition or homogeneous composition. Some other examples of solution are air, alcohol plus water, and vinegar. In air, different gases mix together to form a homogeneous mixture. Alcohol plus water mix together in such a way that they form a uniform composition or homogeneous composition. In vinegar, acetic acid is dissolved in water and they also form a uniform composition or homogeneous composition. Thus remember that a mixture is said to be a solution if its particles forms a homogeneous composition. Secondly, in a solution, the particles are so small that we cannot spot them with naked eye. Now, what is suspension? Well, a suspension is a heterogeneous mixture of undissolved particles in a given medium. So all heterogeneous mixtures are suspensions. Let me repeat it. All heterogeneous mixtures are suspensions. For example, when we add mud or sand in the water, we get a suspension. Sand and water forms a non-uniform composition or heterogeneous composition. Because if we left sand plus water for some time, sand settles down at the bottom and a clear layer of water appears at the top. We can spot large particles of sand and water with naked eye in it. So it is a heterogeneous mixture or suspension. Some other examples of suspension are oil plus water, tea, and dust particles in air. In oil plus water, we can spot the layer of oil and the layer of water. In tea, we can spot small particles of tea and a column of liquid, while we can also spot the dust particles in air. Thus remember that a suspension is a heterogeneous mixture in which particles are large enough and can be seen with naked eye. Secondly, if suspension is left for some time, large or undissolved particles settle down at the bottom due to gravity. Let me repeat it. If suspension is left for some time, large or undissolved particles settle down at the bottom due to gravity. Now, what is a collide? A collide is intermediate state between a solution and suspension. For example, consider some milk. We know that milk contains globes of butter fat suspended throughout the liquid. So milk is a collide. Because the particles of milk are intermediate in size between those of a solution and suspension. Even if a collide or milk is allowed to stand for some time, the particles of collide or milk will not settle down. Some other examples of colloids are butter, jelly, ink. In all these colloids, particles are small and suspended throughout the medium. Secondly, these particles of colloid will not settle down at the bottom even if they stand for some time. Until now, we learned that a solution is a homogeneous mixture which forms a uniform composition and we cannot spot the particles in it, like salt solution. Secondly, we learned that a suspension is a heterogeneous mixture which forms a non-uniform composition and we can spot the undissolved particles in it. Also, if suspension is allowed to stand for some time, its big particles will settle down at the bottom due to gravity. For example, sand plus water forms a suspension. While we also learn that the intermediate state of a solution and suspension is a colloid. The particles in a colloid are larger than those of a solution and smaller than those of a suspension. If a colloid is allowed to stand for some time, its particles will not settle down at the bottom. For example, milk is a colloid. Finally, let me teach you the difference between solution, colloid, and suspension. A solution is a homogeneous mixture, a colloid is a heterogeneous mixture, and a suspension is also a heterogeneous mixture. Secondly, in solution, the size of particles is from 0.01 up to 1 nanometer. In colloid, the size of particles is from 1 up to 1000 nanometer. In suspension, the size of particles is larger than 1000 nanometer. Thirdly, the particles of a solution do not separate on standing. Also, the particles of a colloid do not separate on standing, while the particles of a suspension separate on standing. Fourthly, the particles of a solution cannot be separated by filtration. Also, the particles of a colloid cannot be separated by filtration, while the particles of a suspension can be separated by filtration. Fifthly, the particles of a solution do not scatter light. The particles of a colloid scatter light, and this effect is used to distinguish a solution from a colloid. This effect is also known as a Tyndall effect. While the particles of suspension may or may not scatter light, but light are not transparent. This was all about suspension, colloids, and solution.